Dunkin Donuts. While I know the company that is Dunkin now wishes that everyone simply forgets the whole donut thing, right up until you walk in the door and you're confronted by the very thing you're not supposed to mention. The porous, frosted rainbow that greets you on entry is a conspicuous display of what works, has worked, and will work in the future. A rainbow that does not end with the pot of gold of legend, but rather the black liquid kind. Though highly treasured, the myriad of colors is what draws you in. Donuts, in summary, are the slam dunk over McDonald's and Starbucks. Not coffee. Slam dunking coffee is more hazardous, but not as hazardous as Dunkin catching you saying Dunkin Donuts. Much worse. While a strong and decisive pivot away from solely donuts may be the current strategy for Dunkin, this focus on coffee is not a new one, and Dunkin Donuts, at least, has been going probably a lot longer than many people are aware of. Even longer if you count the initial stint under the name of Open Kettle that started in 1948, when William Rosenberg first opened a donut and coffee restaurant in Quincy, Massachusetts. Just deciding to change your name started early for Dunkin. While still Open Kettle, a donut would cost 5 cents and a cup of coffee would set you back 10 cents. By all accounts, coffee and donuts would make up a large amount of the sales. The name Open Kettle likely stems from the method of cooking donuts, a sign that Rosenberg from the very off knew what would draw in customers. That side box of frosted colors will do that. With both donuts and coffee being the main sellers, the name was changed to Dunkin Donuts in 1950, after Rosenberg had a brainstorming session with his executives. Rosenberg was pragmatic in his approach to business, rather than being headstrong when it came to personal ideas. It seems that if something worked, by that I mean if something sells, then that was what would be done. Not always the case when it comes to those with egos. Rosenberg himself was a child of testing times. Growing up in the midst of the Great Depression, like many in similar circumstances, money was tight. After dropping out of school when his parents' grocery store was lost to the Depression, he had to work odd jobs to survive. He shined shoes and shoveled snow. Not at the same time, but hard work nonetheless. At 14, a young Rosenberg was working full-time for Western Union as a telegram delivery boy, before moving on to an ice cream vending company and becoming an electrician for a steelworks during World War II. It was here that the sidestep into the catering business happened, when he started a catering business. With a combination of his own money and money borrowed from relatives, Rosenberg started the Industrial Luncheon Services, a single catering truck operation that then expanded into a pretty large setup. An early innovation was conceived when, due to a lack of funds to buy more trucks, he bought 10 taxicabs, which in hindsight should be hailed as a great idea. He converted the taxicabs into catering trucks, much like the ones that are used today, which stock shelves of sandwiches, snacks and drinks. By this point he was then moving into in-plant catering, a sort of original plant-based dining, essentially worker cafeterias. It is from here that he noticed that just 40% of his revenue was coming from just two products, coffee and pastries, which saw the opening of his standalone restaurant, Open Kettle. With the business doing well, Rosenberg decided the way to expand was going to be through franchising. So in 1955, that is what happened, with the first Dunkin Donut franchise opened, still in Massachusetts, but this time in Worcester. This is a pivotal moment for Dunkin Donuts. While it is reported that at this time, the term franchising was viewed negatively, this is the time when most of the household names in the industry started, such as McDonald's and Burger King. Why it was pivotal for Dunkin Donuts is that Dunkin would concentrate on growing through franchising alone, much like, say, Subway would later do. At the time, franchising was about to get a boost. Made much more acceptable as a business practice, Rosenberg in 1959 lobbied at a trade show for the creation of an industry group. This was the formation of the International Franchise Association. If you're thinking this sounds like a sinister mob of marauding 1950s entrepreneurs roaming the streets of corporate America with wanton disregard for anyone that stands in their way, I can't verify if you're right or wrong, but perhaps some light leaning on the right people to progress a collective's ambitions might be more accurate. I certainly wouldn't want to cross the IFA and find out. Terrifying. While Dunkin Donuts was growing, and growing quickly, the brand, you might argue, has always seemed regional, more prominent in the Northeast than the rest of the country or internationally, which is no surprise given this is where Dunkin started. However, given that Dunkin Donuts started catering for working class people at the very beginning, there is something in the identity of Dunkin Donuts that should be given more attention, more focus. The fact that Dunkin Donuts, or Dunkin, is more no-nonsense, traditionally, more working class than say Starbucks, which seems to be the market that Dunkin has in the crosshairs. There's no way I'm going to Dunkin Donuts to write my next screenplay. It's not happening. Impossible. What kind of main protagonist can I conjure up in a Dunkin? The lighting, ambience, mixed with sweet carbohydrates and caffeine would result in the worst rom-com ever, which is saying something. The future strategy for Dunkin might be to simply do what Dunkin does best, and not to try and be like Starbucks. Let Starbucks be Starbucks. There's people that just want a good coffee and a donut. No nonsense people, and there's a lot of them, no doubt, me included. They don't want to write screenplays, or pretend they're in a high-powered business meeting, which is where customer loyalty comes in. Dunkin does appear to have a strong loyal customer base. All the more reason that this is something that is sustained and improved on, rather than jeopardizing the experience and product in search of new markets. Although, whether the loyalty is with Dunkin or Dunkin Donuts, or if many people have really started calling it Dunkin and not Dunkin Donuts. This is obviously easier when moving into new markets, or in less entrenched areas. I imagine customers in the northeast states are going to call it the same thing they have for years, whether that is already Dunkin or Dunkin Donuts, or something else. If you're from the northeast, let me know in the comments section what you call it. Either way, to start changing names isn't without risk, although fairly common for brands to shorten a name, especially when looking to broaden a product range. There is often a surprisingly large amount of money spent revamping the image of the brand, rather than simply just changing the sign or logo. In Dunkin Donuts' case, you can see the appeal. Most of the company's sales are beverages, so Dunkin is a beverage company, not a donut company, but it is a donut company and a munchkin company, not to mention the frozen drinks and breakfast sandwiches. If everyone just called it Dunkin, there wouldn't be any problem. But Dunkin, at best, is a nickname, and that's an issue. Nicknames are supposed to demonstrate familiarity, affection. It's why nicknames exist. You don't go changing your birth certificate to your nickname. So should Dunkin bring back the donuts, reinstate the name? Well, just to be clear, I doubt they will. Firstly, it would mean spending some crazy amount of money all over again. It would be an admission of error. Heads would roll. But it does still feel like it's slightly half-hearted. Dunkin Donuts is still found on some packaging. The D and the D logo is still around. What's the other D stand for, Dunkin? The company's website is still dunkindonuts.com, although it is just dunkin.co.uk in the UK, and Canada, well, more on that in a minute. It feels like 4 years on, it's still not sure. If you look at the sales for 2019, a year on from changing to Dunkin, sales were up 5%, which looks like it paid off. However, the reality is that customers are not really affected or concerned with the name change, most likely. If you zoom out and look at the revenue for Dunkin brands worldwide, you'll notice that the company has been growing steadily regardless of the name change in 2019. It's hard to look beyond that due to the impact of the pandemic as sales were affected. But assuming that the change of name has somehow shifted everyone's perception of what Dunkin sells would be a stretch. The reality is, in the short term, customers are still calling it what they always have, and that won't change. What will change is the customer. For changing a name is likely a long-term strategy for Dunkin. As a new generation becomes familiar with the brand, the new name is much more likely to stick. The clue to this next generation strategic thinking is subtly highlighted by Dunkin's new concept stores named Next Generation Concept Stores. If you haven't been to one, you might be expecting a drive-through lane for flying cars and robot donut makers. It turns out that the next generation will, wait for it, be subtly different. Such differences include a tap system for cold brew, like a craft pub you might find converted from an old shipping container miles away from any dock, an express drive-through lane, and natural light to create an approachable, positive, and energetic environment. Dunkin's words, not mine. And while we're on the subject of words, you might be wondering, this is all well and good, but what kind of slogans will be printed on the next generation uniforms? Positive and upbeat ones is the answer. Things like, fueled by positive energy, and drink coffee, be awesome. Dunkin claims the slogans serve as a form of self-expression, which having a billion-dollar corporation decide for you beforehand will be great for saving time for future generations. So Canada, why no Dunkin? Canadians are indeed fond of coffee and donuts, like the rest of us, as evidenced by the increasingly popular donut and coffee chain Tim Hortons, which is a big part of the issue. It seems like Timmy's popularity in Canada, among other things, made operating Canadian franchises too difficult. As a result, Dunkin has ceased trading in Canada, which is surprising. Dunkin Donuts had operated for decades in Canada. In 2016, a group of Canadian franchisees were awarded $80 million after accusing Dunkin Donuts of not providing enough support, which might just highlight the problem, that or the decision had been made a long time ago. Either way, $80 million is a lot of dough, and Tim Hortons has a strong defensive game. All things Dunkin' or Dunkin Donuts, let me know. Thanks for watching.